Good morning. It's good to see you today. We're going to continue our discussion or our reading of the Screwtape letters. Again, my name is Steve Turner. I teach a Sunday school class, the Koinonia Lindsay class here at First United Methodist Church in Starkville. And in our Sunday school class, we have been recently studying the Screwtape letters by C.S. Lewis. And that's what we're doing here on the television world. We've worked our way through most of the letters. We're at the last section, the last part of the Screwtape letters. And just as a little review, these letters were written by C.S. Lewis, who was a professor at Oxford of literature. They were written at the beginning of World War II. Kind of the beginning right before London was about to be bombed. And basically they were magazine articles. Each letter is a short piece that was published by the Guardian magazine in England. And the book, the Screwtape Letters, is a collection of all these letters. So right now we're on letter 25. And again, the main characters are Screwtape, who is a senior level demon tempter, but he's risen to administration, and his nephew Wormwood, who this is his first assignment as a tempter, and he's been assigned to this young man who is called the patient in the letters. So let's go ahead. Our approach here is to read a little bit, stop a little bit, discuss, and then read a little bit more. So today we're going to try to do 4 letters. We usually do 3, but we're going to see if we can get 4 letters in today. So let's see how that goes. Let's go ahead and start letter 25. My dear Wormwood, the real trouble about the set your patient is living in is that it is merely Christian. They all have individual interest, of course, but the bond remains mere Christianity. What we want, if men become Christians at all, is to keep them in a state of mind I call Christianity and. You know, Christianity and the crisis, Christianity and the new psychology, Christianity and the new order, Christianity and faith healing, Christianity and physical research, Christianity and vegetarianism, Christianity and spelling reform, whatever it may be. If they must be Christians, let them at least be Christians with a difference. Substitute for the faith itself some fashion with a Christian coloring. Work on the horror of the same old thing. Now this is going to be interesting because probably C.S. Lewis's most famous book is called Mere Christianity. Again, this book, Mere Christianity, was taken from a series of radio lectures that he gave between basically 1942 and 1944. And so what he's saying here to Wormwood is find some other attractive topic, attractive idea, attractive movement, and combine that with his Christianity so that eventually that movement, that whatever, becomes not only equal to his Christianity, but overrides it. So his Christianity just becomes an argument in sustaining his whatever the movement is. And so he says, work on the horror of the same old thing. The horror of the same old thing is one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart, an endless source of heresies in religion, fallacy in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconstancy in friendship. The humans live in time and experience reality successively. To experience much of it, therefore, they must experience many different things. In other words, they must experience change. He, referring to God, has balanced the love of change in them by a love of permanence. He has contrived to gratify both tastes together in the very world he has made. By that union of change and permanence we call rhythm. He gives them the seasons, each season different, yet every year the same, so that spring is always felt as a novelty, yet always as the reoccurrence of an immemorial theme. He gives them in his church a spiritual year. They change from a fast to a feast, but it is the same feast as before. And so, remember, Screwtape is advising Wormwood how to win this young man's soul. So here he says, take advantage of the same old thing. Take advantage of the change that occurs, but the permanence that they desire, human beings. And so he continues, now just as we pick out and exaggerate the pleasure of eating to produce gluttony, so we pick out this natural pleasantness of change and twist it into a demand for absolute novelty. So we're always looking for something new. Only by our incessant efforts is the demand for the infinite or unrhythmical change kept up. So what he's advising Wormwood is take advantage of this, the pleasure of change, and make it into a desire for novelty, a desire for newness. The demand is valuable in various ways. In the first place, it diminishes pleasure with increasing desire. The pleasure of novelty is by its very nature more subject than any other to the law of diminishing returns. And continued novelty costs money, so that the desire for it spells avarice and unhappiness on both. Finally, the desire for novelty is indispensable if we are to produce fashion or vogues. Now, he talks about fashion quite a bit because that's the current trend, and it's not in clothing, but it's in ideas. So he continues, the use of fashions in thought is to distract the attention of men from the real dangers. We direct the fashionable outcry of each generation against those vices of which it is least in danger, and fixed its approval on the virtue nearest to that vice which we are trying to make endemic. The game is to have them all running about with fire extinguishers whenever there's a flood, and all crowding to the side of the boat, which is already nearly gunwale under. Respectability, lecherous ones against puritanism, and whenever all men are really listening to be slaves or tyrants, we make liberalism the prime bogey. Now, what he's saying here is that we latch on to things and we make them that our focus for the day. So it can be anything. It can be sports, which is a common thing that we get really excited about and forget most of our other duties, so to speak. It can be politics. It can be themes or ideas, conservative, liberal. I've heard if it's conservative, it's okay. And whether it goes against my Christian beliefs or whatever, it's conservative, so that's where I'm going to go. It could be the same thing on the liberal side. And the devil doesn't really care. Whichever one it is, he doesn't care. He doesn't care if it's sports, politics. He doesn't care what it is. He just wants your soul, and he wants that to become the focus of your life, and your Christian life to fade in the background. All right. So the devil wants us to think with the world, and the world be the influence of who we are and what we do. And so God asks the question, and he mentions this here. Let's see where that is. The enemy loves platitudes, the enemy being God. Of a proposed course of action, he wants men, so far as I can see, to ask very simple questions. Is it in accordance with is it righteous? Is it prudent? Is it possible? Now, if we can keep them, men, from asking these kinds of questions, we want them to ask questions like, is it in accordance with the general movement of our time? Is it progressive or reactionary? Is this the way that history is going? So on and so on. Is it conservative? Is it Mississippi State? Is it whatever it is? It doesn't really matter. We want to get them away, humans, from asking the important question, is it true? Is it true based on what I've learned and what I know? Or does it meet my prejudice and bias? So again, we have largely removed this knowledge. For the descriptive adjective unchanged, we have substituted the emotional adjective stagnant. And when you look at those two words, which one is more attractive? Or even which one is less attractive? Stagnant, that's usually not a good word we like to use, or unchanged, which is kind of neutral. So we have trained them to think of the future as a promised land which favored heroes attain, not as something which everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes an hour, whatever he does, whoever he is. So the reality of the situation is the future is time-wise the same for all of us. It is a 60-minute period. The hour is 60 minutes. The minute is 60 seconds. And we need to take advantage of that situation as it is and live our lives in accordance with what we know from our teaching from Christ and from God. All right, let's move to the next letter. The letter is 26. And this one has to do with how Screwtape is going to advise Wormwood to utilize unselfishness to the devil's advantage. And this is kind of interesting because he says, the grand problem is that of unselfishness. Note once again the admirable work of our philological arm, our language arm, in substituting the negative unselfishness for the enemy's positive charity. Thanks to this, you can, from the very outset, reach a man to surrender benefits, not that others may be happy in having them, but he may be unselfish in foregoing them. This is a great point gained. Another great help, where the parties concerned are male and female, is the divergence of view about unselfishness, which we have built up between the sexes. A woman means by unselfishness chiefly taking trouble for others. A man means not giving trouble to others. As a result, a woman who's quite far gone to the enemy's service will make a nuisance of herself on a larger scale than any man except for those whom our Father has dominated completely. And conversely, a man will live long in the enemy's camp before he undertakes as much spontaneous work to please others as a quite ordinary woman may do every day. Thus, while the woman thinks of doing good offices and the man of respecting other people's rights, each sex, without any obvious unreason, can and does regard the other as radically selfish. And he goes on to make the point, about unselfishness, how we've turned the word charity, which has Christian connotations, into the word unselfishness. Now, at the center of unselfishness, the word is what? Self, which is exactly what the devil wants us to do. He wants us to concentrate on ourself, okay? He wants us to think of ourselves and how whatever activity is, whatever behavior it is, how it either benefits us or it doesn't benefit us. And benefit might be, as a Christian, how we are doing things for God, okay? And he ends this letter saying, I wish Slum Trippet could do something about undermining that young woman's sense of the ridiculous. Remember, the young woman is a pretty committed Christian. Her family is a Christian family. He's warned Wormwood that this is really a bad situation, that the patient, the young man, is now surrounded by not only Christians, but mature Christians. And the worst is he's fallen in love with this young woman who is taking him away from the bad path, the devil's path, and towards God's path. All right, let's continue in letter 27. You seem to be doing very little good at present. The use of his love to distract his mind from the enemy is, of course, obvious. But you reveal what poor use you are making of it when you say that the whole question of distraction and the wandering mind has now become one of his chief subjects of his prayers. That means you have largely failed. When this or any other distraction crosses his mind, you ought to encourage him to thrust it away by sheer willpower and to try to continue the normal prayer as if nothing has happened. Once he accepts the distraction as his present problem and lays that before the enemy and makes it the main theme of his prayers and his endeavors, then so far from doing good, you have done harm. Anything, even a sin, which has the total effect of moving him close up to the enemy, makes against us in the long run. So, and this gets back to repentance. So when we're made aware of our sin, the avenue is repentance. Turn to God, confess, ask for forgiveness, and ask for the ability to resist temptations. Remember, in some of our previous lessons, we've talked about the Lord's Prayer and how Jesus instructs us to pray to God to help us resist temptation and deliver us from the evil one. Really, the Screwtape letters, that's the essence of the Screwtape letters. Help us resist temptation and deliver us from the evil one. Because Screwtape and wormwood are, in fact, the evil one. So what we have here are petitionary prayers that the young man is making. And he's distracted, he realizes it, and he's asking God for help. But there's a problem, and he's going to tell Wormwood what the problem is with the patient. He says, but since your patient has contracted the terrible habit of obedience, he will probably continue such crude prayers whatever you do. But you can worry him with the haunting suspicion that the practice is absurd and can have no objective results. Don't forget to use the heads I win, tails you lose argument. If the thing he prays for doesn't happen, then that is one more proof that petitionary prayers don't work. If it does happen, he will, of course, be able to see some of the physical causes which led up to it, and therefore it would have happened anyway. And thus a granted prayer becomes just as good a proof as a denied one that prayers are ineffective. And so his prayer life, he talks quite a bit with Wormwood about that and how to utilize the prayer life. But the problem with this patient is he's learning through time. You remember, as human beings, we're constrained through time. And he makes the point, the spirits realize there's a past, there's a present, there's a future, but there's an eternity. It's sometimes hard for us as human beings. We understand the past, we understand the future, the present, but the future's kind of hazy for us. We don't know what the future holds. And then when we look at eternity, pretty much all we know about that is what we're taught in the Bible and through other ways. And in fact, eternity is not really a topic of discussion for a lot of us many times. So he continues and talks about prayer and how important it is to God and how we, the devil, needs to thwart prayers in any way as possible. And the major way of doing that is through distraction. So as we continue our reading of letters, let's go to letter 28. It begins with, again, my dear Wormwood, when I told you not to fill your letters in rubbish about the war, I meant, of course, that I did not want to have your rather infantile rhapsodies about the death of men and the destruction of cities. Insofar as the war really concerns the spiritual state of the patient, I naturally want full reports. On this aspect, you are singularly obtuse. Thus you tell me with glee that there is reason to expect heavy air raids on the town where the creature lives. This is a crying example of something I've complained about already. your readiness to forget the main point in your immediate enjoyment of human suffering. Do you not know that bombs kill men? Or do you not realize that the patient's death at this moment is precisely what we want to avoid? He has escaped the worldly friends with whom you tried to entangle him. He has fallen in love with a very Christian woman and is temporarily immune from your attacks on his chastity. And the various methods of corrupting his spiritual life, which we've been trying, are so far unsuccessful. At the present moment, as the full impact of the war draws nearer and his worldly hopes take a proportionally lower place in his mind, full of his defense work, full of the girl, forced to attend to his neighbors more than he has ever done before and liking it more than he expected, taken out of himself, as the humans say, and daily increasing in conscious dependence on the enemy. He will almost certainly be lost to us if he is killed tonight. He's going to advise Wormwood to do all in his power to keep the patient alive, because if he dies now, Screwtape sees him as lost to God, which is the whole purpose of Wormwood, is to gain the patient's soul for the devil. He says something that's interesting here. They, of course, are human beings, do tend to regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. But that is because we have taught them to do so. Do not let us be infected by our own propaganda. I know it seems strange that your chief aim at the moment should be the very thing for which the patient's lover and his mother are praying, namely his bodily safety. But so it is. You should be guarding him like the apple of your eye. If he dies now, you lose him. If he survives the war, there is always hope. And so again, if he survives the war, that means he might have an old and long life, which allows Wormwood continue opportunities to win his soul. He says something to the effect, all this provides admirable opportunities of wearing out a soul by attrition, that is, as he gets older. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing and agreeable work build up in him a sense of really being at home in earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. The truth is that the enemy, having oddly destined these mere animals to life in his own eternal world, has guarded them pretty effectively from the danger of feeling at home anywhere else. This is why we must often wish long life to our patients. 70 years is not a day too much for the difficult task of unraveling their souls from heaven and building up a firm attachment to earth. Real worldliness is a work of time, assisted, of course, by pride, for which we teach them to describe the creeping death as a good sense or maturity or experience. A great human philosopher nearly let out our secret when he said that where virtue is concerned, experience is the mother of illusion. So, whatever you do, keep your patient as safe as you possibly can. So in this letter, he's encouraging Wormwood to do whatever he can to protect the patient from death, because if the patient dies at this point in time, it doesn't look good for the devil, because the patient is in communication with God, and God is protecting him, and he's in God's house. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.